The courtroom was heavy with silence, the kind that presses against your chest until it's hard to breathe. Rows of people sat shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the small wooden bench at the front. The smell of polished wood mixed with old paper and tension. Somewhere near the back, a toddler's small sneakers dangled over the edge of a chair, swinging without rhythm. Her name was Emma Parker, only 3 years old. Her mother, Lavra, sat beside her, pale, exhausted, clutching a worn-out teddy bear in one hand and her daughter's fingers in the other. Reporters had gathered in the hallway since dawn, whispering rumors about the tiny witness. Most thought it was nonsense. A child couldn't possibly understand what she'd seen, much less testify in a case that had shaken an entire police department. But when the judge himself asked to meet the little girl privately before the hearing, curiosity grew into wildfire. Across the courtroom, a German shepherd sat obediently beside his handler. The K9's name was Max, a dog who'd served the city for 5 years and had a reputation for loyalty and precision. His dark coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the room with quiet alertness. Max didn't understand human tension. To him, this was just another room, another day, another set of strange smells. But to everyone else, he represented the line between justice and corruption. At the defense table sat Sergeant Daniel Blake, his posture upright, his uniform crisp, his jaw locked tight. He'd been the department's most decorated K9 handler, until the night everything changed. A routine drug bust had turned violent. A suspect had died. Blake claimed self-defense. The department backed him. Case closed. That was, until Emma started talking. It began innocently. 2 weeks after the incident, Lavra had been putting her daughter to bed when Emma whispered something strange. "Mommy," she said, clutching her teddy, "the doggy hurt the man." Laura froze. "What doggy, sweetheart?" "The one with the loud stick man," Emma murmured, her eyes wide and glassy. "He said take him." The doggy listened. At first, Lavra thought it was imagination. Children saw things differently, she told herself. Maybe Emma had overheard something on the news or misremembered. But when detectives came by asking questions about whether they'd been near the Miller warehouse that night, Laura's stomach turned cold. They had been near there. Lavra had driven by on her way home from her late shift, caught in the traffic of flashing lights and sirens. She'd stopped for a few seconds when Emma cried out in the back seat, pointing at the commotion. That was the night a man died. Now, weeks later, the court was packed to see the smallest person ever linked to a case this serious. The judge, a patient man with years of experience, leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Parker," he said gently, "your daughter doesn't have to speak if she's uncomfortable. This is just an informal statement." Laura nodded nervously. She's okay, Your Honor." Emma didn't seem scared, just curious. She stared at the judge, then at the rows of strangers, then at the tall, muscular dog sitting quietly near Sergeant Blake. Her little head tilted. "Doggy," she whispered. The judge smiled faintly. "Yes, that's Max. He's a police dog. Do you like dogs, Emma?" The child didn't answer. Her expression changed serious now, as if remembering something. Slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed directly at Max. The entire courtroom watched, breaths held. Then came the words, 2 small syllables that would ripple through the justice system for months. "Bad dog." It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. Just soft and certain. The courtroom went silent. Even the reporters froze mid-note. Sergeant Blake blinked, his confident mask slipping for the first time. The judge glanced at Laura. "Mrs. Parker?" Laura's heart pounded. She'd heard those same 2 words before, on the night Emma had woken screaming from a dream, crying about a man who fell down. Emma dropped her teddy bear onto the floor, but she didn't move. Her gaze stayed fixed on Max, as though she were seeing that night again. Not the calm dog sitting there, but the one under flashing red lights, barking, biting, chaos all around. Detective Harris, sitting near the back, watched carefully. He'd reopened the case 2 weeks earlier, after finding small inconsistencies in the original report, missing timestamps, altered footage, testimony that didn't line up. But he never imagined the case would hinge on the words of a toddler. The judge cleared his throat softly. "Emma, sweetheart," he said, his tone warm and patient. "Why do you think he's a bad dog?" Emma blinked. "He hurt the man." The man said sorry, but the dog didn't stop. Blake shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, this is—" The judge raised a hand. "Sergeant, you'll have your turn." He looked back at Emma. Did someone tell the dog to do that? The girl's brow furrowed. The loud stick man did. He said, "Take him." Then boom. She clapped her small hands together sharply, imitating the sound of a gunshot. A reporter dropped his pen. Lavra pulled Emma close, her arms trembling. Harris's heart thudded in his chest. That phrase, "take him," wasn't in any report. It wasn't public knowledge. It was, however, the exact command Blake used during K-9 deployments. Only those in the unit would know it. The judge sat back, stunned. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly. "You've been very brave today." The bailiff guided them out, Lavra holding Emma tight, tears streaking her face. Outside the courtroom doors, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. Lavra kept walking, shielding her daughter from the chaos. Harris stepped into the hallway, watching them go. The little girl's words echoed in his mind. Bad dog. 2 words that might not mean guilt, but pointed toward something darker. Inside the courtroom, Blake sat still, jaw clenched, eyes following them. He knew what Harris was thinking. He also knew the truth wasn't buried deep, it was sitting right there, wrapped inside a child's perfect memory. That night, as Lavra tucked Emma into bed, she whispered, "You did so good today, baby." Emma nodded sleepily. "Doggy was sad," she murmured, curling up with her teddy. "He didn't want to be bad." Lavra froze again. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "The loud stick man made him," Emma said, eyes half closed. "He said take him, and then boom." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, eerily familiar to that night months ago. Lavra sat beside her daughter, heart heavy with realization. The world saw a decorated officer and his loyal partner. But her little girl had seen something different, something no adult dared admit. And the next morning, when Detective Harris knocked on her door, he wasn't there to question anymore. He was there to listen. The rain that night didn't fall softly. It came down in heavy, slanted sheets that blurred the city lights and turned the streets into rivers. Lavra Parker gripped the steering wheel of her old silver sedan, wipers fighting to keep up. It was nearly midnight, and the last thing she wanted was to be driving through another storm after her long shift at the diner. Her eyes burned from exhaustion. In the back seat, Emma was half asleep, her little hands still clutching her teddy bear. The soft glow of passing headlights lit her small face in intervals. Every few seconds, thunder cracked, and she would stir, murmuring nonsense in her dreams. Lavra turned onto Miller Avenue, the shortest route home. That's when she saw them red and blue lights flashing in the distance, dozens of them. Her foot eased off the gas. Police cars lined the street near the Miller warehouse, their beams slicing through the rain like searchlights. Something about the scene felt off. A police helicopter circled overhead, its spotlight sweeping over the wet asphalt. Officers shouted orders over the noise, their voices muffled by the storm. Laura's stomach tightened. "What on earth?" She whispered, "Mommy, came a tiny voice from the back. "Doggy." Lavra glanced in the rearview mirror. Emma was sitting up now, pointing outside. Through the fogged-up window, Lavra could just make out the shape of a large German shepherd breaking from an officer's side, sprinting toward the warehouse. Its handler followed, tall, broad-shouldered, commanding. "Stay down, baby," Lavra said, forcing calm into her voice. But curiosity burned inside her. Something in her instincts told her to stop. She pulled over, turning off the engine. The sound of the rain against the roof was deafening. Then she heard it. A man's voice, shouting, barely audible over the wind. Then another voice, deep and firm. The first one was pleading. "I'm unarmed, please." Laura's pulse spiked. She could see only flashes now, the warehouse entrance, shadows moving, the dog barking furiously. And then it happened. A command sliced through the air, distinct and sharp. "Take him." The dog lunged forward into the darkness. A scream tore through the night. Then a gunshot, one single, echoing boom that silenced everything. Emma screamed, clutching her teddy. "Doggy hurt the man." She cried. Baby, it's okay. It's okay," Lavra whispered, panicked, fumbling with her seat belt. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She wanted to drive, just go, now, but she froze, staring into the chaos. Officers ran past, shouting into radios. The air smelled of rain and gunpowder. The sight of the dog returning to his handler, muzzle wet and eyes wild, burned into her mind. "Mommy, the man's on the floor," Emma whispered. Lavra swallowed hard and forced the car into gear. "Don't look, sweetheart." She drove away fast, her hands trembling, headlights slicing through the storm. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did Emma. The next morning, news broke everywhere. Armed suspect killed in self-defense during police raid. Reporters praised the quick thinking of Sergeant Daniel Blake and his K-9 partner. Max, the suspect, a 29-year-old named Carlos Rivera, was described as a known felon with a record of drug trafficking and assault. The report said he resisted arrest, pulled a weapon, and was neutralized after Max intervened. Lavra read the article twice, her stomach twisting. She remembered the pleading voice, the shout of surrender. The report didn't mention that. It didn't mention the command. She looked over at Emma, who was sitting on the floor drawing. The little girl had drawn a dog with sharp teeth and a man lying on the ground beside it. "Sweetheart," Laura said softly, kneeling beside her. "Why did you draw that?" Emma looked up. "That's the doggy from last night. He was sad." "Sad?" Emma nodded solemnly. "He didn't want to bite, but the man made him. The man with the loud stick." Lavra froze. The phrase struck her like lightning. The loud stick? She knew what Emma meant. Days passed, and Laura tried to convince herself it was just imagination. Kids mix dreams with real life. Emma had probably heard something, filled in the blanks. But then the nightmares started. Every few nights, Emma would wake screaming, "Don't let the doggy bite him. Mommy, stop him." Laura would hold her until she calmed down, whispering, "It's okay, baby. You're safe." But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. One evening, 2 weeks later, there was a knock on the door. Lavra opened it to find Detective Michael Harris standing there, tall, kind-eyed, the type who'd seen too much. He introduced himself politely, showing his badge. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. I just have a few follow-up questions about the night of the warehouse incident. I believe you may have been nearby." Laura's heart skipped. Yes, we drove past." "Why?" Harris hesitated. "Some discrepancies came up in the reports. We're just double-checking witness statements." Emma peeked from behind her mother's leg, curious. "You're a policeman?" Harris smiled gently. Yes, I am. And who's this? I'm Emma, she said proudly, clutching her teddy. That's a lovely bear you've got, Harris said. Were you with your mom that night? Emma nodded, eyes wide. Yes, I saw the doggy. Harris blinked. The police dog? She nodded again, and whispered, He hurt the man. Mommy said he's a good dog, but he was bad that night. Lavra froze. Harris studied her expression. Emma, he said carefully, can you tell me what the man said before the dog ran? The girl thought for a moment. He said, take him, and then boom. She clapped her hands together, imitating the sound. Harris's calm facade cracked for a moment. He scribbled something quickly in his notebook. Thank you, sweetheart. You've been very brave. After he left, Laura's hands shook. That night, she turned on the news again. The footage from the raid showed nothing, just blurry movement and flashing lights. The body cam, they said, malfunctioned. The police chief called it a tragedy, but justified. Still, Laura couldn't shake Emma's words. She replayed the sound of that night in her head, the command, the scream, the shot. 2 days later, Detective Harris returned. This time, he looked different, tired, cautious. Mrs. Parker, he began quietly, we're reopening the internal review. What your daughter described. It matches details that were never made public. Laura's throat tightened. You think she's right? I think she saw something real, he said. We recovered partial radio chatter from that night. Someone, possibly Sergeant Blake, gave the order to deploy the dog after the suspect surrendered. He paused. But without the full body cam, it's just words. And now? Well, your daughter's words might be the key. Lavra sank into a chair. She's only 3. Harris nodded. I know. But sometimes, kids see what adults ignore. Later that evening, Lavra sat on the edge of Emma's bed as the little girl colored pictures of clouds and dogs. Mommy? Emma said softly. Am I in trouble? No, baby. Why? Because I said the doggy was bad. But he wasn't. The man made him bad. Tears stung Laura's eyes. No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. You're just telling the truth. Emma smiled faintly, as if comforted. Then she looked out the window at the rain starting again. The sky's crying, Mommy, just like the doggy. Lavra turned away so her daughter wouldn't see her cry. Outside, thunder rolled once more, echoing the shot that had haunted them both. And somewhere in a police station across town, Detective Harris replayed that same command over and over again, in his head hearing the faint words through static. Cold and undeniable. Take him. It was the same phrase a 3-year-old had whispered in a trembling voice. And for the first time in his career, Harris realized that the smallest witness might be holding the biggest truth of all. Detective Michael Harris had handled countless cases in his 15 years on the force murders, robberies, even corruption. But nothing like this. Not once had the words of a 3-year-old rattled him the way Emma Parker's had. He sat in his small office at the Burlington Police Department, a styrofoam cup of coffee going cold beside stacks of reports. On the wall hung a photo of his first partner, another canine handler, both smiling proudly beside a German Shepherd not too different from Max. Now, every time he looked at that photo, all he could hear was that small, haunting voice. He said, take him. Then, boom. The department wasn't happy about his renewed curiosity. The Internal Affairs Division had already ruled the shooting justified. Sergeant Daniel Blake was still on duty, still praised by local news. Any suggestion of misconduct was an attack on the department's reputation. But something about this case wouldn't leave Harris alone. The missing footage, the edited report, the unusually fast clearance. And now, the one witness everyone had ignored, too young to lie, too innocent to twist details. He opened the case file again, spreading photos across the desk. The suspect, Carlos Rivera, 29. No weapon recovered. No visible gun in any surveillance still. A single bullet wound. A police dog covered in blood, not his own. Harris exhaled. "What did you do, Blake?" he muttered. That afternoon, he drove across town to the Little Oaks preschool, where Lavra Parker had agreed to meet him after class hours. He didn't want to interview Emma at the station too intimidating. When he arrived, the playground was empty except for a few scattered toys and the faint echo of laughter from inside. The smell of crayons and disinfectant filled the hallways. Lavra was waiting in one of the small classrooms. She looked nervous but determined. "She doesn't remember everything the same way every day," she said quietly. "But she's been drawing that dog almost every night." Harris nodded. "That's normal for trauma. Kids process through play and pictures." Emma entered, holding her teddy bear like always. She smiled shyly at Harris. "Hi again, Emma," he said warmly. "You remember me?" She nodded. "You're the nice policeman. That's me." He crouched down to her level. "Can I ask you about the night you saw the doggy?" Emma sat cross-legged on the carpet, thinking. "It was raining," she began softly. "Mommy said we can't go close, 'cause police were shouting. But I saw the doggy. He had shiny necklace." "Necklace?" Emma made a small circle with her fingers. "Like gold. But it was silver." Harris's breath caught Max's training collar, was steel-chained, custom polished by his handler. No photo of it had ever been released. He pressed gently. "And what did the man with the doggy say?" She frowned, concentrating hard. He said, "Take him." Then loud sound, boom. Lavra swallowed. "She said that before." Harris looked between them. "That command isn't in the official report. Only handlers use that phrase. It's not something anyone outside the K9 unit would know." He straightened, mind racing. This wasn't imagination. It was recollection. That night, Harris sat in his car outside the K9 training facility, watching from across the street. The floodlights painted the yard white as handlers worked with their dogs, commanding them through drills. He spotted Sergeant Blake imposing, broad-shouldered, the picture of confidence. Max sat obediently beside him, ears alert. Blake barked commands, and Max obeyed instantly. The crowd clapped when the dog took down a padded trainer flawlessly. "Perfect execution," someone said proudly. But Harris didn't see perfection. He saw control. Total, unquestioning control. When the session ended, Harris approached. "Sergeant Blake." Blake turned, his expression stiffening slightly. "Detective." "Didn't know Aya was still interested." "I'm not Aya," Harris said. "I'm just following up on some inconsistencies." "Inconsistencies?" Blake chuckled dryly. "You mean gossip? Because of some kid?" Harris met his eyes. "That kid remembers things no one else should." Blake's jaw tightened. "She's 3. "Exactly," Harris said quietly. 3-year-olds don't make up specific police commands." For a moment, Blake said nothing. Then he smiled coldly. "You're chasing ghosts, Harris." "I did my job." "That suspect was armed. Where's the weapon, then?" Blake's face hardened. "Check evidence." "I'm done with this conversation." He turned and walked away, Max trotting beside him. The dog's tail wagged slightly as he passed, brushing against Harris's leg. The detective looked down at those intelligent brown eyes, steady, loyal, unaware of the storm surrounding him. "Not your fault, boy," Harris murmured. Later, Harris stopped by Records Division, hoping to pull the K9 unit logs from that night. The clerk frowned. "Strange. The file's missing. Computer says it was archived, but there's no trace. Who archived it? She scrolled. Sergeant Blake. Harris left the office burning with frustration. Everything led back to Blake, and every trail was being erased behind him. Driving home through the rain, he called Lavra. "Mrs. Parker, I need to ask a favor," he said. "Could I have one of Emma's drawings?" Something from that night. Lavra hesitated. "Of course. She's made dozens." "Just the one she drew first," Harris said. "The very first one." When he picked it up the next morning, his breath caught. It wasn't scribbles. It was detail. A warehouse, a storm, 2 stick figures, one large, one small, and a dog with teeth drawn in red crayon. But above the dog's head, Emma had written something shaky but recognizable. 2 small words in uneven letters. "Take him." He stared at it, goosebumps prickling his skin. Children didn't invent written words they hadn't heard repeated. Someone had said that phrase clearly enough for her to remember the sound and the letters. He folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into a folder. Meanwhile, Blake's confidence began to crack. Inside his locker, an envelope appeared one morning. No name, no note. Just a single photo, one frame from the missing body cam footage. It showed Blake's arm extended, Max mid-lunge, the suspect's hands raised. Scrawled across the photo in red marker were 2 words, "We know." His stomach dropped. Someone inside the department was leaking. He crumpled the photo and shoved it into his pocket, forcing composure as another officer walked in. But his hands wouldn't stop shaking. That afternoon, Harris returned to his desk to find an unmarked USB drive sitting on his keyboard. No message, no envelope. Just the drive. He looked around the station, buzzed as usual, no one paying attention. With a deep breath, he plugged it into his computer. A single file appeared, cam_0912.mp4. The footage opened grainy, unstable but unmistakably from a body cam. Officers shouting, thunder roaring, lights flashing. A man's voice pleading, "Don't shoot. I surrender." Then came Blake's voice call, commanding, "Take him." Max lunged. The camera jolted. A scream. Then the gunshot. The video cut to black. Harris leaned back, stunned. His pulse thundered in his ears. Emma's testimony had just been confirmed by the camera everyone claimed was missing. He copied the file twice, locking one in an encrypted folder, then walked straight to the chief's office. "Chief, you need to see this," he said, voice firm. The chief frowned. "Harris, I told you Ia cleared it." "Not anymore," Harris said, pushing a laptop forward. As the footage played, the chief's expression hardened, then darkened. "Where did you get this?" "Anonymous source." "This can't leave this room," the chief said quickly. "If this leaks before verification, we'll have a riot." "I don't care about optics," Harris snapped. "A man died unarmed, and a good dog was used as a weapon." The chief sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'll authorize a sealed hearing, quietly, no press." Harris nodded, but inside he knew quiet wasn't good enough. That evening, as he drove home, the city skyline blurred through his windshield. His phone buzzed an unknown number. He answered. A deep voice said, "You should have left it alone, detective." Then silence. The call ended. Harris gripped the wheel tighter, his mind racing. He knew now that this went higher than one man and one dog. There were people who wanted the truth buried. But one small girl had already spoken the truth once, without fear, without agenda. And Harris realized, as the rain fell harder, that her tiny voice might just be the only light left in a department gone dark. Detective Michael Harris didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small kitchen with the blinds half closed, the USB drive resting on the table beside a cup of untouched coffee. The air smelled of rain and tension. Every few minutes, he replayed the footage, pausing at the frame where Sergeant Daniel Blake shouted those two chilling words. "Take him." Each time, the same conclusion struck him harder. Emma Parker had been right all along. At 6:30 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was Laura Parker. Her voice trembled. "Detective, someone was outside my house last night." Harris sat upright. "Did you see who?" "No, but my neighbor said a black SUV kept idling near the mailbox. When he went out, it drove off." "Stay inside," Harris said quickly. "Lock the doors. I'll send a patrol to circle the block." He hung up, anger flooding through him. Someone was trying to intimidate them, someone who knew he was closing in. He slipped the USB into his jacket pocket, grabbed his badge, and headed for headquarters. Inside the Burlington Police Department, tension ran thick as fog. Word had spread something about new evidence, body cam footage, and a sealed meeting. Officers whispered in hallways, conversations halting whenever Harris walked by. When he reached his desk, his computer monitor was already on. Someone had gone through his emails. The cursor blinked in an open draft titled Evidence Submission. It hadn't been there when he left. He looked around, no one in sight. Only the faint hum of the vending machine down the hall. He muttered, "They're in here, too." Harris took the elevator down to the basement archives, a windowless space lined with shelves of case files, digital drives, and old canine training tapes. The custodian, Frank Dawson, a grizzled man nearing retirement, looked up from his coffee. "Morning, Detective. You look like you've seen a ghost." "Feels like I'm chasing one," Harris replied. He showed Frank the photo Emma had drawn the dog. The words, "Take him." Frank whistled softly. "That's one smart kid. Smarter than most adults I know," Harris said. "Frank, did you ever see the full footage from the Rivera case?" "Not the redacted one." Frank frowned. "We logged the original, yeah. But then Blake came down with an order, said EA needed it for review. Took it himself. Never brought it back." "That's what I thought," Harris said grimly. "You still have the log sheet?" Frank rummaged through a metal drawer, pulling out a clipboard. "Here his signature, dated 2 days after the shooting." 2 days after? Harris murmured. That was when the official report claimed the footage had been lost in transfer. He snapped a photo of the log sheet. "Thanks, Frank. If anyone asks, you didn't talk to me." Frank gave a slow nod. "Be careful, Mike. This smells like rot way up the ladder." That afternoon, a sealed hearing convened at Burlington City Court, away from public eyes. Present were Chief Owens, the city prosecutor, Sergeant Blake, and Harris. The prosecutor, Ellen Price, began sharply. "Detective Harris, you claim to possess new evidence contradicting a closed investigation?" "I don't claim," Harris replied, placing the laptop on the table. "I have it." He played the footage. The room went silent. The faint hiss of static, the rain, and Blake's voice. "Take him." The image of the suspect raising his empty hands before the fatal shot. When the screen went black, Ellen leaned back, her eyes wide. "Is this authentic?" "Metadata confirms the device ID. It's Blake's camera," Harris said. "The same one reported damaged." Blake shot to his feet. "That video is doctored." He barked. "He's manipulating." "Sit down, Sergeant," Chief Owens said coldly. Blake's face flushed red. "You're going to believe some kid and a detective chasing ghosts?" Harris turned slowly. "A 3-year-old remembered what your report forgot to mention. That command isn't standard. You used your dog as justification for lethal force." "You weren't there," Blake snapped. That man reached for something. There was nothing to reach for. Harris slammed a photo on the table. The crime scene after cleanup. No weapon found. Ellen rubbed her forehead. We'll verify this footage through forensics. Until then, Sergeant Blake is suspended pending review." Blake glared at Harris, eyes full of hatred. "You're making a mistake, Detective. You don't know who you're dealing with." "Maybe not," Harris said. "But I know what I'm dealing with." That night, Harris left the courthouse with a sense of uneasy victory. The truth was moving forward, but he knew corruption didn't end with one man. Blake's confidence, his access, his arrogance, it all pointed to a network shielding him. He drove home through quiet suburban streets, headlights slicing through mist. Halfway there, he noticed a dark sedan in his rearview mirror. It stayed several car lengths behind, turning when he turned. He changed lanes. The sedan followed. His pulse quickened. He pulled into a gas station, parked by the pumps, and stepped out casually. The sedan rolled past, windows tinted, and disappeared into traffic. He stood there for a moment under the fluorescent lights, rain dripping from the edge of his jacket. Someone was watching every move he made. He filled his tank and walked inside to pay. The clerk handed him a folded receipt, and beneath it, a note written in shaky handwriting. "They know about the girl." Harris froze. By the next morning, Laura Parker's phone was full of missed calls from unknown numbers. At 9 a.m., she answered one only static on the line. Then a whisper, "Drop it or your daughter won't be safe." She hung up, trembling. Emma, sitting on the floor coloring, looked up. "Mommy, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart," Laura said, forcing a smile. But her hands shook so badly, she dropped the crayon box. She called Harris immediately. He arrived 20 minutes later with 2 patrol officers and placed a protection order on the house. "You're not alone," he assured her. "This is intimidation, nothing more." Laura looked at him, eyes wet. "You think they'd really hurt a child?" Harris hesitated, then said softly, "They've already hurt enough people to stay quiet." Later that day, at the station, Harris received an email from an anonymous address. Subject, "Proof you missed." Attachment, "Training_day." Zip, he opened it on an isolated laptop. Inside were dozens of files, internal canine evaluations, handler notes, and one video labeled "Unauthorized Exercise." The footage showed Blake running drills with Max in an empty warehouse. A man in civilian clothes, later identified as a volunteer actor, stood at a distance. Blake shouted, "Take him!" And Max attacked without hesitation. But what sent chills through Harris's spine was Blake's laughter afterward. "Perfect. You'll make me untouchable, boy." The timestamp was 1 week before the shooting. Harris copied the files, heart pounding. He knew what this meant. The shooting hadn't been an accident. It was a deliberate act of test. That night, he met Ellen Price at a quiet diner off Highway 89. She arrived with 2 federal agents from the Department of Justice. "You've stirred something bigger than local IA," she said, sliding him a folder. Inside was a printed email chain between city officials, referencing incident suppression and risk management. "They planned the narrative," Ellen said. The report was rewritten before the body cam even malfunctioned. Harris stared at the documents. "Who signed off?" "Deputy Chief Reynolds," Ellen replied grimly. "He's been covering for Blake for years. We're filing a federal obstruction case." He leaned back, stunned. "So the rot goes all the way up." "Farther," Ellen said. "Reynolds is retiring next month. Once he's out, he'll disappear with immunity. We have 2 weeks to move." On his way home, Harris parked near the harbor, the waves glinting beneath streetlights. He called Laura. "Everything's changing," he told her. "The people responsible are being exposed. But I need you and Emma to stay somewhere safe for a while, maybe with family." Laura's voice was weary, but strong. "We can go to my sister's in Maine." "Good." Don't tell anyone where you're going. I'll contact you when it's over." Before hanging up, a small voice came on the line. "Mr. Harris?" Harris smiled faintly. "Hi, Emma. You find Doggy?" He paused, looking out at the dark water. "Not yet," he said softly. "But I will." Back at the department, as Harris climbed the steps toward his office, he noticed something odd. His door slightly open, the light on. He drew his weapon, pushing it open slowly. Inside, his desk was overturned. Papers scattered. The drawer where he'd hidden the backup USB was empty. On the wall, scrawled in red marker, were 2 words: "Too late." He lowered his gun, heart pounding. Someone had been inside while he was gone. Someone who wanted him to know they were still 1 step ahead. He stood there in the wrecked silence, realizing that this wasn't over. It was just beginning, and the missing footage was only the first piece of a much darker puzzle. Detective Michael Harris stood in the middle of his trashed office, the stench of fear and cheap marker ink filling the air. The words on the wall, "Too late," burned into his mind. Every instinct screamed that someone inside the department had orchestrated this break-in. He looked at the empty drawer where the USB backup had been. That copy contained not just the incriminating footage, but names, emails, everything tying Deputy Chief Reynolds to the cover-up. Now it was gone. He ran a hand through his hair, forcing himself to breathe. The laptop still held a copy, but the warning was clear. They could reach him anywhere. He locked the door, picked up his phone, and called Assistant Prosecutor Ellen Price. "They've been in my office," he said. "The backup's gone." Ellen cursed softly. "Then they know we have the video. You need to disappear for a bit. I'll handle the court side." "I'm not disappearing," Harris snapped. "I'm finishing this. I need Blake." "Harris," he hung up. He knew where to find Sergeant Blake. The man was predictable. Every Thursday night, Blake trained Max at the abandoned airfield on the outskirts of Burlington. It wasn't on any official schedule, but Harris had tracked his truck there before. By the time Harris arrived, the night had turned sharp and cold. The moon lit the cracked runway, and faint barking echoed from a hangar up ahead. He parked his unmarked sedan behind a rusted fuel tank and moved quietly toward the sound. Through the broken hangar window, he spotted Blake throwing a rubber decoy across the floor, Max chasing it with obedient precision. Blake's laughter echoed. "Good boy. Perfect execution." The same chilling phrase from the unauthorized training footage. Harris raised his phone and started recording. Then Blake froze. His head turned slowly toward the window. "You can come in, Detective. No need to sneak." Harris's stomach tightened. He stepped through the door, keeping his tone calm. "Didn't expect you to be here alone. Sometimes it's just better that way," Blake said, stroking Max's fur. "No questions. No lies. You broke into my office," Harris said. "You took the evidence." Blake smiled faintly. "I'm a cop, Harris. I investigate threats. You became one. You killed an unarmed man, and your bosses covered it up." Blake's smile faded. "You think I wanted that?" Rivera wasn't innocent. He was dealing fentanyl to kids in the park. "I did what the system couldn't." Harris stepped closer. "The system doesn't let you play God." Blake's jaw clenched. "You don't understand loyalty. They taught us to protect our own." "I protect the truth," Harris said. For a moment, the 2 men stood silently, the dog between them, tail twitching nervously. Then Blake nodded toward Max. He followed orders that night. "Just like me." "Maybe it's time someone stopped following," Harris said. Blake's hand moved too fast. Harris ducked, instinctively drawing his weapon, but Blake didn't fire. Instead, he tossed something toward the floor. It clattered a small USB drive, identical to the one stolen from Harris's office. "Consider it a gift," Blake said, "before they bury us both." "What's on it?" "Proof that Reynolds ordered the suppression. Emails, memos, transfers. But take it from me, Detective, you're not ready for what happens next." Then Blake called softly, "Max, stay." The dog obeyed instantly as Blake walked past Harris, out into the darkness, vanishing into the cold night. Harris pocketed the drive. Something told him that wouldn't be the last time he saw Sergeant Blake. The next morning, Harris drove to a small motel outside the city limits, where he set up a makeshift workspace. His paranoia had grown by the hour. Every shadow looked like surveillance. Every phone call might be tapped. He plugged in the new USB drive. Inside was a folder labeled Command Chain. Hundreds of emails scrolled across his screen. Reynolds exchanging confidential reports, talking about media containment and public safety optics. One message froze him cold. From D. Reynolds to Chief Owen. Subject: Riviera Containment I. Evidence suppression confirmed. Ensure all footage destroyed. One copy may exist. Locate and neutralize source. P.S. Ensure Parker Child's name never surfaces. His hand trembled. They knew about Emma. Meanwhile, in a quiet neighborhood across town, Laura Parker packed a small suitcase. The house had become a cage of fear. Patrol cars came and went, but the calls hadn't stopped. "Mommy, are we going on a trip?" Emma asked, hugging her teddy bear. "Yes, sweetheart," Laura said softly. "We're going somewhere safe." She tried to sound calm, but her voice cracked when she saw headlights outside. Her phone rang. Harris. "Laura, listen to me carefully," he said urgently. "You need to leave now. Drive to the address I texted you. Don't tell anyone where you're going. What's happening? They know about Emma. You're not safe." Laura's heart pounded. She grabbed her keys, lifted Emma into her arms, and hurried to the car. As she backed out of the driveway, a black SUV turned the corner behind her. "Mommy, who's that?" Emma whispered. Laura's breath caught. "Hold on tight, baby." At the same time, Harris drove toward the safe house, a small cabin near Lake Willoughby, owned by an old friend. He was on the phone with Ellen Price. "I've got the real evidence now," he said. "If something happens to me, I've backed it up to a federal cloud drive." "You're not alone, Harris," Ellen replied. "The feds are moving in on Reynolds. We just need one clean statement from Blake." "Good luck with that," Harris muttered. "Blake's running." "Then find him first," Ellen said, "because Reynolds will silence him before the weekend." As Harris reached the lakeside road, his headlights caught something ahead. Laura's car pulled onto the shoulder. The driver's side door was open. He stopped, heart hammering. "Laura!" he shouted, running toward it. No response. The car was empty. Emma's teddy bear lay in the back seat. Then he saw the skid marks, leading off into the woods. He drew his weapon and followed. The trail led down a narrow dirt path to a cabin lit faintly inside. Voices carried through the wind. "Quiet, kid," a man's voice hissed. Harris crept closer, peering through a window. Inside, Deputy Chief Reynolds stood with two plainclothes men, Emma sitting on a chair, clutching her bear. "She doesn't understand anything," one man said. "She doesn't have to," Reynolds replied coldly. "We just need leverage." Harris raised his gun, adrenaline spiking. Then headlights swept across the cabin from behind. Another vehicle. It was Blake. He stepped out, hands raised. "Reynolds." "Let the kid go." Reynolds turned, shocked. "You?" "She's just a child," Blake said quietly. "I signed up to serve, not to bury kids." Reynolds sneered. "You already buried one." Before anyone could move, Harris kicked open the door. "Police, drop your weapons." Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the night. Harris dove for cover as Blake tackled one of Reynolds's men. Emma screamed. A bullet shattered a lamp. Blake fired once Reynolds fell backward, clutching his shoulder. The second gunman fled out the back. Harris grabbed Emma, shielding her as debris rained down. "It's okay, you're safe," he whispered, his voice shaking. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Ellen Price had traced Harris's phone. Blake slumped against the wall, bleeding from his arm. "Guess I finally did something right," he muttered with a half-smile. "You did," Harris said. "You saved her." Blake's eyes flickered toward Emma. "Tell her. Max wasn't bad. He was just following orders." Then he passed out as officers swarmed the cabin. Hours later, dawn broke over Lake Willoughby. The chaos had ended. Reynolds was in custody. The emails, footage, and files Harris had gathered were already in federal hands. Lavra hugged Emma tightly near the ambulance. "You were so brave, baby." Emma looked up at Harris, eyes bright. "Mr. Harris? Is Doggy okay?" Harris knelt beside her. "Yeah," he said softly. "Doggy's okay now. He's going to live somewhere nice, where no one tells him bad words anymore." She nodded, smiling faintly. "Good." Ellen Price approached, handing Harris a cup of coffee. "You realize you just blew open one of the biggest internal scandals this state's seen in decades." Harris looked toward the rising sun. "I didn't do it alone," he said quietly. "A 3-year-old little girl did most of the work." Ellen smiled. "Out of the mouths of babes, huh?" "Something like that." As they watched the paramedics drive away, Emma waved from the back window. Harris waved back, his heart heavy but full. He knew this wasn't just a victory, it was a reminder. Truth had a way of surviving, even when whispered by the smallest voices. And sometimes, justice began with 2 simple words. Take him. The sun rose over Burlington, painting the lake gold and quiet after a night of chaos. News vans lined the courthouse steps, their antennas jutting skyward like metal thorns. For the first time in years, the Burlington Police Department wasn't leading the story. It was the story. Headlines flashed across screens. Deputy Chief arrested in K-9 cover-up scandal. Leaked footage exposes wrongful shooting. Child witness key to federal probe. Detective Michael Harris watched it unfold from the lobby television, coffee cooling in his hands. He should have felt relief, maybe even pride. Instead, he felt hollow, drained by months of silence, fear, and danger that had finally erupted into truth. He turned as Ellen Price, the prosecutor, entered, looking equally weary. "Feds are taking Reynolds to D.C., she said. "He's facing obstruction, evidence tampering, and 2 counts of conspiracy." Harris nodded. "And Blake?" "Recovering at St. Mary's. He lost a lot of blood, but he'll live. The Bureau's reviewing his file. He may avoid prison if he cooperates." Harris exhaled slowly. "He saved that kid's life. That counts for something." Ellen's tone softened. "You saved more than that, Harris. You forced this department to look in the mirror." He looked back at the TV, at the flashing lights, reporters shouting questions, the building he'd once been proud to wear the badge for. "Let's just hope they don't look away again," he murmured. Later that morning, Lavra Parker sat in a quiet hospital waiting room while Emma colored on a paper placemat. She looked small, fragile, her blonde hair tied in 2 uneven pigtails, face smudged with crayon dust. A nurse approached. "Detective Harris just called, Mrs. Parker. He's on his way up." Lavra nodded gratefully. She hadn't stopped shaking since the night before. Seeing Reynolds holding her daughter had frozen her blood. Emma looked up from her drawing. "Mommy, can we see Doggy today?" Laura blinked. Doggy? Max, Emma said softly. He's not bad, remember? Mr. Harris said so. Laura forced a smile. We'll see, sweetheart. Maybe one day. An hour later, Harris arrived. He looked worn, his shirt wrinkled, tie loosened, eyes rimmed red. But when he saw Emma, he smiled. Hey, partner, he said, crouching beside her. You doing okay? She nodded. You catch bad guys? He chuckled. Yeah, we caught them. They won't hurt anyone again. She grinned and held up her drawing. A dog, a man, and a little girl, all holding hands. See? Doggy's happy now. Harris's throat tightened. That's beautiful, Emma. Laura placed a hand on his shoulder. I can't ever thank you enough. You don't have to, Harris said. Just live. Let her forget this. Laura's eyes filled with tears. How do you forget something like that? Harris didn't answer. He wasn't sure anyone could. By afternoon, the Department of Justice had taken over the Burlington precinct. Boxes of files were carried out. Officers whispered nervously as federal agents swept through offices, tagging evidence. Chief Owens stood before the press, hands trembling slightly as he read from a statement. The Burlington Police Department deeply regrets the events surrounding the Rivera incident. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators. Trust must be rebuilt, and accountability begins now. Behind him, reporters shouted questions, flashes blinding him. Was the K-9 officer involved? Is it true a 3-year-old exposed the cover-up? Will Sergeant Blake face charges? Owens cleared his throat. That's under review. But one thing was certain. The people weren't ready to forgive. Not yet. Meanwhile, in a secure K-9 facility outside the city, Max lay quietly in his kennel. His bandaged leg trembled occasionally, a reminder of the chaotic night. A handler named Officer Jamie Rhodes knelt beside him, stroking his head gently. Easy, boy, she whispered. You're safe now. When she opened the kennel door, Max stepped out slowly, sniffing the air. His eyes darted toward the open field beyond the fence, a space he hadn't seen since the night of the shooting. Rehabilitation will take time, the vet said, watching. He's been through trauma. Commands like, take him, will have to be retrained out of him completely. Rhodes nodded. He deserves a second chance. They all do. She clipped a leash to his collar and led him into the sunlight. For the first time in months, Max didn't flinch at the sound of a distant siren. That evening, Harris drove to the hospital to see Blake. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. Blake sat up weakly, N4 in his arm, staring at the muted TV, replaying news coverage of his own scandal. When he saw Harris, his eyes narrowed. Come to gloat? Came to say thank you, Harris replied evenly. You didn't have to show up last night. Blake snorted. Maybe I just didn't want Reynolds to own my story. Whatever your reason, you did the right thing. Blake turned toward the window, his jaw tight. Doesn't make up for what I did. No, Harris said quietly. But it's a start. After a long silence, Blake said, They're going to take Max away, aren't they? He's being retrained. Officer Rhodes has him. Good, Blake murmured. He's a good dog. Never his fault. Harris stood, heading for the door. You were a good cop once, Blake. Maybe you can be one again, in your own way. Blake didn't reply. But as Harris left, he whispered, Tell the kid, I'm sorry. Outside the hospital, Harris sat in his car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. The case was over. The files were secure. The bad men were caught. But inside him, a quiet ache lingered, the kind only truth could leave behind. He thought of Emma's words, of the drawing she'd given him. The dog, the man, the little girl. It reminded him why he'd joined the force in the first place. Not for medals or headlines, but for moments when right still meant something. He took out the drawing from his coat pocket, smoothing the wrinkles. In the corner, Emma had written, crooked but proud, Mr. Harris the hero. He smiled faintly, tears stinging his eyes. Days passed. The city calmed, though trust remained fragile. The story spread nationwide, sparking debates about police accountability and reform. In Washington, federal hearings opened on misconduct within small-town departments. Harris was called to testify. He sat before cameras, under oath, telling everything exactly as it happened. The footage, the threats, the bravery of a child who'd spoken 2 simple words that shook an entire system. When asked why he'd risked everything, Harris answered simply, because silence protects the wrong people. The room went silent. A week later, Harris visited the K-9 facility one last time. Officer Rhodes greeted him at the gate. He's doing better, she said with a smile. You should see this. She led him to the training field. Max ran freely, ears perked, chasing a rubber ball across the grass. No muzzle, no commands, just freedom. When Max saw Harris, he stopped, tail wagging. Hey, buddy, Harris said softly, kneeling as Max approached. The dog sniffed his hand, then rested his head against Harris's arm. You're a good boy, Harris whispered. Rhodes smiled. We're thinking of retiring him early. Maybe finding him a new home. Harris looked down at Max, then at the sunset stretching across the field. I think I know someone who'd take him, he said. 2 weeks later, a knock echoed on Lara Parker's front door. When she opened it, Harris stood there, Max by his side, wearing a new blue collar. Detective? She said, surprised. I come bearing a peace offering, Harris said with a small grin. Emma's eyes widened. Doggy, she squealed, running forward. Max wagged his tail, lowering his head gently as Emma hugged him. He's yours, if you want him, Harris said softly. He's retired now, just a family dog. Laura's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? He deserves to be somewhere good, Harris said. And I think he already loves her. Emma giggled as Max licked her cheek. See, Mommy? Doggy's happy. Harris smiled, feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. As the sun dipped below the Vermont hills, Harris stood by his car, watching the little girl and the dog chase each other in the yard. For once, there were no sirens, no reporters, no lies, just laughter. He looked up at the sky and whispered, It's over. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just the end of a case. It was the beginning of something better. Because sometimes, justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, through the smallest voices and the purest hearts. And on that quiet evening in Burlington, the truth had finally found its home. 2 months had passed since the courtroom exploded with the truth. Burlington had settled into a strange quiet, not peace exactly, but a breath after the storm. Snow dusted the lakefront, and the courthouse steps were bare now. No cameras, no lights. Detective Michael Harris stood outside, watching his breath fog in the cold air. The cases, the hearings, the depositions, all done. Yet something about the silence felt unnatural. He'd spent years chasing noise, sirens, shouting, the heartbeat of chaos. Now, in its absence, the world felt too still. A voice interrupted his thoughts. You still watching ghosts, detective? He turned to see Ellen Price approaching, scarf wrapped tightly against the wind. She smiled faintly, handing him a coffee. Thanks, he said, taking it. How's the fallout? She sighed. 24 officers resigned. The department's restructuring. The state wants an oversight committee. Good, Harris murmured. Maybe this time, the truth will stick. Ellen hesitated. You did the right thing, Michael. But right doesn't always feel good, does it? He looked out over the lake, eyes distant. No, but it feels honest. That evening, he drove to Lavra Parker's home. It had become a small sanctuary, laughter spilling from the living room, the smell of cocoa in the air. When he knocked, Emma opened the door herself, beaming. Mr. Harris. She was wearing a tiny sheriff's hat, plastic badge glinting in the light. Beside her, Max trotted happily, his fur thicker now, eyes bright. Lavra appeared behind her daughter, smiling. You're early, she said, stepping aside. Come in. Harris entered, brushing snow from his coat. Brought something for the little officer. He handed Emma a small framed certificate. Junior Deputy, Emma Parker. Her eyes widened. That's me. That's you, he said, grinning. The bravest deputy I've ever met. Laura's eyes softened. You didn't have to do that. She reminded me why I started doing this, Harris said quietly. They sat together as Emma played with Max, the fire crackling nearby. Harris felt warmth he hadn't known in years. After a while, Lavra spoke softly. Do you ever regret it? Blowing the whistle? Harris thought for a moment. Every day. But I'd regret not doing it even more. She nodded slowly. I understand that. Meanwhile, across town, the Burlington Police Department looked nothing like it once had. Posters about integrity lined the hallways. Officers attended mandatory ethics sessions. The old walls of silence had cracked open. At the morning briefing, the new Chief Owens addressed the squad. We're starting over, he said firmly. If anyone here can't handle transparency, there's the door. Among the officers sat Jamie Rhodes, Max's former handler, now leading the K-9 unit's retraining program. She raised her hand. Sir, with respect, maybe we should involve the community. Open days, school visits, real outreach. Owens nodded slowly. Approved. Make it happen. After the meeting, Rhodes texted Harris. Thinking of doing a K-9 community day. Bring Emma? She might like to see Max in action again. Harris smiled at the message. Maybe, finally, something good could come of all this. The next week, the Burlington K-9 Community Day drew hundreds. Children lined the field as handlers demonstrated obedience routines and search drills. The air buzzed with laughter, not tension. When Rhodes took the mic, she gestured toward the bleachers. We've had tough months here, but today's about rebuilding trust. And one little girl reminded us that truth matters, no matter how small the voice. Lavra blinked in surprise as Rhodes motioned them forward. Please welcome our honorary junior deputy, Emma Parker. Applause erupted. Emma, shy but smiling, stepped onto the field holding Harris's hand. Max ran ahead, wagging wildly. Rhodes handed Emma a treat pouch. Want to give him a command? Emma looked at Max, then whispered softly, Good boy. Max sat immediately, tail sweeping the grass. The crowd cheered. Laura's eyes welled with tears as Harris crouched beside Emma. You see that? He said. He listens because he trusts. Emma looked up. Like you trust me? Exactly, Harris said. The crowd, the cheers, the sunlight. For the first time since the nightmare began, the town felt whole again. Later that evening, Harris and Lavra sat on a park bench, watching Emma and Max chase snowflakes. Laura spoke softly. You've changed, you know. You smile now. He chuckled. Guess I forgot how. Will you stay here? Or go back to D.C. with the federal task force? He hesitated. They offered me a position. Oversight division. More politics than police work. And he looked at Emma, twirling in the snow. Maybe the world doesn't need another official in D.C. Maybe it just needs more people who care in places like this. Lavra smiled. That sounds like the right answer. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. But the peace didn't last long. A week later, Harris received a call from an unknown number. A male voice on the other end said, "You made powerful enemies, Detective." Reynolds wasn't the only one. Then the line went dead. The old chill returned instantly. He traced the number, unlisted, routed through an encrypted network. It was a reminder that truth doesn't end with headlines. Some ghosts fight back. He called Ellen Price. "I just got a threat." Her tone sharpened. "Could be a bluff. You're still protected under federal whistleblower status." "Maybe," Harris said. But whoever that was, they weren't bluffing. Days later, his fears proved right. His car's windshield was smashed, tires slashed, and a note pinned under the wiper. Truth dies eventually. Harris handed the evidence to the local sheriff. But he knew how these things worked. Some men had friends in high places. That night, Lavra called him, her voice trembling. "Are you safe?" Emma's scared. She saw the news. "I'm fine," Harris said softly. "I won't let anything happen to you too." "You've done enough," she whispered. "Maybe it's time to step back." He paused, staring at the broken glass glinting under the streetlight. "If I step back now, they win." The next day, Harris met Ellen in her office. "We can relocate you," she said. "Federal protection, new identity if needed." He shook his head. "No, I won't run from this. If I disappear, the story disappears too." Ellen exhaled sharply. "You can't fight every shadow, Michael." He smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I can light one candle." She frowned, confused. He pulled a folder from his jacket. "Inside are all my case notes, testimonies, recordings, everything. If something happens to me, release it to the press." Ellen looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. "You're serious?" "As death," he said quietly. That night, Harris drove through Burlington, city lights flickering on snow-covered roofs. He stopped at the old precinct, now partly empty. Through the glass doors, he saw young officers in training, learning new rules, new ethics. He smiled. Maybe change really had begun. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Lavra. Emma fell asleep hugging Max. She said you're her hero. Harris's throat tightened. For all the threats, the losses, the pain, those words made everything worth it. He replied simply, "She's mine too." Later, as the clock neared midnight, Harris sat alone on his porch. The snow fell softly, blanketing the world in white silence. He poured himself a small glass of bourbon, not to forget, but to remember. Every name, every moment that led here. Somewhere behind him, a car engine idled briefly, then faded into the night. He didn't move, didn't flinch, because truth wasn't a weapon to hide behind. It was a torch to hold, even when it burned. And as the snow fell heavier, Harris whispered to himself, "They can't kill what's already been seen." Inside Laura's house, Emma stirred in her sleep. Max lifted his head, ears twitching, then lay back down beside her. Outside, the town slept, unaware that the man who'd risked everything to bring light into their darkness now faced the shadows alone once more. But somewhere deep within that quiet night, justice stirred again, fragile but alive. And for Detective Michael Harris, that was enough. The storm rolled in before dawn. Heavy snow blanketed Burlington, muffling the city in an eerie silence. Detective Michael Harris hadn't slept much. The threats still echoed in his head. But this morning, something felt different, calmer, almost inevitable. He stood at his kitchen window, sipping black coffee, watching the streetlights flicker through the snowfall. The world looked pure again, like all its dirt had been buried under white. But Harris knew better. The truth didn't vanish. It waited, patient as winter. A sharp knock broke his thoughts. He reached for his sidearm, but relaxed when he saw Ellen Price through the glass, dusted in snow. "You're up early," he said, opening the door. She stepped inside, shaking the cold from her coat. "You need to see this," she said, pulling a folded newspaper from her bag. On the front page, Federal Whistleblower Awarded Medal of Honor for Integrity in Law Enforcement. Below it, a photo. Harris, taken months ago, testifying before Congress. He frowned. "They didn't tell me." Ellen smiled faintly. "Maybe they knew you'd refuse the ceremony." He smirked. "They were right. But Michael," she said softly, "the world finally knows your name for the right reasons." He stared at the paper for a long time, the words blurring slightly. "It's not my name that matters," he said quietly. "It's hers, hers." Ellen asked. "Emma," he said. She reminded all of us that the smallest voice can start the loudest change. Across town, Lavra Parker was helping Emma bundle into her pink snowsuit. Max wagged his tail impatiently by the door, leash in his mouth. "Mommy, is Mr. Harris coming today?" Emma asked, voice muffled through her scarf. Lavra smiled. "Maybe. He said he'd stop by." Outside, the snow crunched beneath their boots. Max bounded ahead, leaving paw prints in the powder. Emma giggled as flakes caught in her eyelashes. The world seemed gentle again, a fragile calm built from courage, truth, and forgiveness. By mid-morning, Harris arrived. His pickup rumbled into the driveway, snow piled high on the hood. When Emma spotted him, she shouted, "Mr. Harris! Mr. Harris!" and ran straight into his arms. He laughed, spinning her once before setting her down. "Careful there, deputy. You almost knocked me over." She giggled. "You're strong." "Like Max." Harris grinned. "Not as strong as Max, I think." Lavra opened the door, smiling warmly. "You braved the snow for coffee, or something more official." "Actually," Harris said, glancing down at Emma, "I came to ask a favor." Emma gasped dramatically. "What is it?" He knelt. "The governor invited me to an award ceremony in Montpelier next week. But I told them I wouldn't go unless my partner came too." Emma's eyes widened. "Me? You?" Harris said with a wink. "The bravest junior deputy in Vermont." Lavra laughed softly, tears in her eyes. She'd be honored. Emma threw her arms around him. "We're partners forever." Harris hugged her back, voice thick with emotion. "Forever." The ceremony took place in the Vermont State House, marble floors gleaming beneath crystal chandeliers. Reporters filled the rotunda, their cameras flashing as the governor spoke. Detective Michael Harris reminded us that courage isn't measured by rank or weapon, but by conscience. His actions exposed corruption, restored faith, and proved that justice still breathes in America's small towns. The crowd applauded as Harris stepped forward, but when the governor presented the medal, Harris hesitated. "Sir," he said quietly, "I can't accept this for myself. I'd like to dedicate it to someone else." The governor blinked. "Who?" Harris turned toward the front row, where Emma sat on Laura's lap, eyes wide. "To Emma Parker, whose 2 words reminded a nation what truth sounds like." The room fell silent. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. Harris bent down, placing the medal gently around Emma's neck. The little girl looked up at him, confused but glowing. "Is this real gold?" she whispered. He chuckled softly. "More valuable than that." The audience rose in applause. Not for a detective, not for a child, but for the truth that had united them both. That evening, back in Burlington, the snow had stopped. Harris, Lavra, and Emma walked along the lake, the frozen water shimmering under a pale moon. Lavra glanced at him. You could have kept that medal. He smiled faintly. She earned it more than I ever did. Emma skipped ahead, tossing snow toward Max. Come on, slowpokes, she shouted. Harris watched her laugh, a warmth filling the hollow place inside him. You know, he said quietly, when I joined the force, I thought justice was about arrests and evidence. Turns out, it's about heart. Lavra looked at him, her breath visible in the cold. You've got more heart than most men I've met. He met her eyes, a space between them small but meaningful. Maybe that's why I never gave up. Or maybe, she said softly, you were waiting to find something, or someone worth fighting for. Harris looked away, smiling to himself. Maybe I did. A few days later, the story reached national television. News anchors praised the bravery of both Harris and the child, whose innocent words had unraveled a chain of lies. But what mattered most wasn't fame. It was what came after. The Burlington Police Department established new oversight laws. The K-9 program became one of the most transparent in the state. A scholarship fund was created in Emma's name to support ethics training for officers. Change didn't come easily, but it came. And in the center of it all, life went on quietly, simple, honest, human. One evening, months later, Harris visited Laura's home again. Emma was asleep upstairs. Max curled protectively beside her bed. Laura poured them each a glass of wine. The house was peaceful. Feels strange, Harris said. No sirens, no threats, no courtrooms. Maybe peace feels strange because you've been fighting too long, she said softly. He smiled. Maybe. There was a pause, not awkward, but tender. You ever think about starting over? Lavra asked. He looked at her, searching her eyes. Every day. She hesitated, then reached out, resting her hand over his. Then maybe don't start over somewhere else. Start here. For the first time in years, Michael Harris let himself believe in something beyond duty, something that looked a lot like home. Spring came to Burlington with a rush of color. The ice melted from the lake. Children played in the parks again, and the courthouse, once a symbol of fear, now stood as a monument to truth. On a sunny Saturday, Harris, Lavra, Emma, and Max walked together through the farmer's market. Vendors smiled and nodded at them. Whispers of respect followed quietly in their wake. A reporter approached Harris, microphone in hand. Detective Harris, any final message for the people who followed your story? Harris glanced down at Emma, who squeezed his hand. Then he looked straight into the camera. Tell the truth, even when your voice shakes. Because somewhere, someone's life depends on it. That night, as dusk settled, Harris stood on his porch, watching fireflies blink across the field. He could hear Emma's laughter drifting from the living room, followed by Laura's gentle voice reading a bedtime story. He smiled, not the smile of a man escaping his past, but of one who had finally made peace with it. The world wasn't perfect. It never would be. But maybe, just maybe, truth had found a home again in Burlington. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, kid." Inside, Emma stirred in her sleep, whispering to Max, "We did it, doggy. We made the bad guys stop." And in the quiet of that small Vermont home, with snow still clinging to the trees and laughter echoing through the walls, the long, painful story of justice finally came full circle, not with a roar, but with a child's soft giggle and the gentle wag of a dog's tail. Because sometimes, the smallest hearts bring the biggest light, and in that light, truth will always return.